I want to talk to you straight for a second before we get into the fun stuff because something happened at practice today that I wasn't fully prepared for. I know the difference between camp noise and camp signal. The difference between that looked cool online and that actually means something in October. And today, buried under a bunch of touchdowns that are going to dominate the headlines, there was real signal, something quietly shifting on this football team that I don't think enough people are watching closely yet. So stay with me, because we'll get to the flashy stuff and to the guy who might be the best player on this roster, but I also need you to hear me out on the story that actually kept me thinking tonight, because it isn't the one you'd expect. Let's set the scene. This is day 3 of training camp, and nobody's in pads yet, which means the quarterbacks are living their best life. Receivers are running around without anybody really allowed to put a hand on them, and the guys up front are essentially fighting with both hands tied behind their backs. Context matters here. You can't treat a padless practice like gospel. But you also can't pretend nothing real happened, because sometimes what shows up before the pads go on tells you more about a guy's habits and football character than a fully live rep ever could. Today's practice was built entirely around red zone situations, live reps inside the 20 over and over, and I saw both sides of that coin. Guys who looked like stars, and at least one guy who looked like he might be in real trouble. Because it's a red zone heavy day, you're naturally going to see a parade of scores. That's just math. That's just what happens when you compress the field down to 20 yards and run rep after rep after rep. But even knowing that going in, I was still kind of stunned by how many different names kept popping up in the end zone. This wasn't one guy putting the entire offense on his back and carrying it. This was closer to an institutional flex, multiple weapons, multiple wins, and if you're building a team you actually want to trust in December, that's the version of an offense you want to see in early August. Kirk Cousins was cooking out there. Plain and simple. He found Brock Bowers for scores more than once, each connection looking a little smoother than the last. But the throw that actually made me sit up wasn't even one that counted. It was a gorgeous back shoulder placement to Malik Benson, a ball that had no business being caught the way Benson caught it. Clean hands, tight coverage, a perfect frame job on the sideline. The officials waved it off, ruled him out of bounds, and honestly, watching it back, I get the disagreement. It was tight enough that reasonable people land in different places on it. But here's what sticks with me. That rep tells you where Benson's head is at, heading into a season where he's fighting to prove he belongs. Confidence like that, attacking a contested sideline ball with total conviction, isn't something a coach installs with a drill. Either it's there or it isn't. Today, it was clearly there. I don't want to paint this like some flawless offensive showcase because it wasn't, and I'd be suspicious of any camp report that tried to sell you that. During 7-on-7 work, Darian Porter got a hand up on a ball meant for Trey Tucker, tipped it, and Taron Johnson was right there to pluck it out of the air. That's the defense reminding everybody in that building they didn't show up just to be a backdrop for highlight throws. And honestly, I like seeing that friction. I don't trust days where the offense strolls through untouched, because that's not evaluation. That's target practice. You want resistance. You want a quarterback forced to shake something off and respond, because that response is the real data point. Which brings me to the guy quietly becoming the single most dangerous piece on this entire roster. I'm not saying this to be loud or to get a reaction. I'm saying it because I believe it after watching it unfold rep after rep. Brock Bowers had his way with this defense today. Multiple vantage points, multiple camp reports, all landing on basically the same conclusion phrased different ways. Nobody out there could deal with him. Linebackers trying to match him in space looked a step behind. Safeties disguising coverage looked like they were guessing. He wasn't just having a good day. He looked like he was playing on a different frequency than everyone else on that field. So here's where I'm planting a flag, and I want you to remember I said it, because by December I think we'll be revisiting this a lot. I believe Brock Bowers finishes this season as the best tight end in the entire NFL, statistically. Not top 3, not top 5. The best, full stop. I know there are names at that position with more hardware and more built-in recognition heading into the year. I'm not talking about reputation. I'm talking about what I'm watching happen on that grass, practice after practice. And I'll go further. I believe he ends this season as the single most valuable offensive piece on this roster, and yes, that includes Ashton Jeanty, a back who walked into this league as one of the most hyped prospects in years. That's a heavy claim. I'm not making it to be provocative. I'm making it because every day I watch this camp, the tape keeps backing it up further. So here's what I need you to start tracking heading into preseason, because I think this is the real story hiding underneath the surface noise. How does Clint Kubiak actually deploy Bowers? Does he keep him anchored in a traditional inline role, occasionally released into route concepts? Or does he move him around the formation like an oversized slot receiver, treating him as a chess piece the way the league's most aggressive offensive minds treat their elite pass catchers now? If Kubiak genuinely believes Bowers is the engine of this offense, and based on today I think he does, I expect him to start scheming this guy open in ways traditional tight ends almost never get schemed open. That's the development I'm watching like a hawk these next few weeks, because it tells you how ambitious this staff is really willing to be once the lights come on. Now let's turn to Cousins, because you genuinely could not look away from what he did today. Multiple touchdown throws, spreading the ball to different targets instead of locking onto one guy, operating with a rhythm and comfort that, given all the noise following this quarterback room into camp, a lot of people weren't expecting this early. That noise is real. There's been plenty of chatter about where this position goes long term, but days like today are exactly why he was brought in. He's processing quickly, getting the ball out on rhythm, and when the defense got the better of him, when that pass got tipped and picked, he didn't sulk. He came right back and answered with touchdowns to Jalen Nailor, Trey Tucker, and Bowers. That's the response you want from the guy under center. Football demands a short memory, and today Cousins showed his is exactly as short as it needs to be. But I can't talk about that quarterback room without bringing up Fernando Mendoza, because what he's doing deserves real attention, not just a passing mention. He's clearly getting legitimate work with these red zone reps, not token snaps thrown his way to check a box. That back shoulder throw he put on Benson, the one that got waved off for the boundary, was genuinely impressive on its own merit regardless of the ruling. You could see the touch on the ball and the timing sync with Benson's route. For a guy still in the developmental stage of his career, that's the kind of rep you point to and say, keep stacking those. What I find encouraging, something that gets lost in a lot of camp coverage, is that the starter isn't hoarding every meaningful rep while the backup mops up garbage snaps. Mendoza is earning real chances inside actual competitive reps, and every one of those in this lower contact environment pays dividends later once things get physical and the margin for error shrinks. Which brings me to a group I think is criminally underappreciated, this young receiver room as a whole. The headlines will always gravitate toward Bowers, and honestly they should, given what he's doing. But zoom out for a second. Malik Benson made a tough, contested catch near the sideline that showed real body control. Trey Tucker pulled in enough targets that he became a guy the defense had to account for, which is a genuinely good sign. It means he's commanding real attention. And Jalen Nailor got more involved than a lot of people probably expected, hauling in a touchdown from Mendoza. I get the instinct to make this whole story about one guy wearing a cape. But if these young receivers keep stacking performances like today's, this offense ends up with a depth chart opposing defenses actually have to respect top to bottom, not just one name circled in red ink. Now let's zoom out further, because understanding Clint Kubiak as a play caller might be the key that unlocks everything else happening in this camp. Study what he's built at previous stops and the pattern is unmistakable. This is a guy who spreads the wealth. He doesn't lock into feeding one back until the wheels fall off, and he doesn't funnel his passing game toward one receiver. He distributes touches across his playmakers, and that's exactly why the Bowers usage question carries so much weight going forward, and exactly why I think this running back room looks different than the casual expectation currently frames it. Which brings us to the backfield. Everybody knows Ashton Jeanty is the starter. Nobody's disputing that. But based on what Kubiak did at his last two coaching stops, here's a number that should reshape how you're thinking about this backfield. In both prior situations, the backup running back actually out-touchdowned the starter. Not by some tiny fluky margin, this happened both times, at two different stops, with two completely different rosters. And the carry split wasn't a forced even distribution, it was a real rotation, substantial enough that the backup consistently carved out genuine scoring chances instead of mopping up garbage time. So when I look at Jeanty and Mike Washington through that lens, I'm not projecting Jeanty into some 300 carry workload where he dominates every snap. I think Jeanty carries the heaviest share, somewhere in that 200 plus range. That part feels safe. But I also think Washington carves out a real role in this offense, not as an emergency change of pace piece, but as an actual scoring threat. Today gave a small preview of that. Washington flashed real juice, breaking off a handful of impressive runs, including one that found pay dirt during that red zone period. Keep an eye on how that workload gets distributed as the season develops, because I don't think it ends up nearly as one-sided as the surface level expectation suggests. Okay, now I need to slow this all the way down, because we've arrived at the part of today that actually stuck with me the most, the part I keep replaying in my head. It's not a touchdown, it's not a highlight throw, it's what's brewing up front on this offensive line, specifically at right guard, and I think it's a bigger deal than most people watching this team currently realize. From what's coming out of camp, Spencer Burford and Jackson Powers-Johnson handled the majority of first-team reps rotating through those interior guard spots today. But majority of reps isn't every rep, and based on what's circulating from the practice film, Caleb Rogers has also been earning legitimate run at right guard. That detail is what's really grabbed my attention, because if you'd asked me before this camp started who the better overall player was between JPJ and Burford, I'd have told you JPJ without much hesitation. But watching this play out, it's starting to look like this staff, Kubiak included, might genuinely view Burford as more locked into the scheme right now than JPJ is. That's not a small distinction. Being talented and being scheme ready are two different things, and in a competitive camp battle, scheme readiness tends to win out early, especially before pads come on. And here's where it gets genuinely concerning for JPJ, because there's real chatter from people who've actually been present at these practices. Not secondhand rumor suggesting he's been whiffing on assignments. Not small, forgivable mental errors either. One specific report described a rep where he clearly saw the defender coming, clearly had the read, and still failed to execute the block. Some of that chatter is suggesting something even more serious, that he could be in genuine danger of losing his starting job before the season even starts. Now, I want to be fair. It's still early. Pads haven't gone on, and there's a real chance this is just camp rust that gets sanded down over the next couple weeks. I'm not ready to hand down a verdict on a former high draft investment based on a handful of padless reps. But I also can't wave away what's being reported by people watching this closely, and this is exactly the storyline that demands our attention as we get closer to real contact drills, because that's when these battles stop being theoretical. There's footage floating around of offensive line coach Rick Dennison working directly with this group, drilling raw technique, and watching it crystallizes everything I've just described. Caleb Rogers works through his angles on what looks like an outside zone concept, and he's genuinely physically driving his assigned defender off the screen. Textbook technique, violent finish, exactly what you want from a young interior lineman making his case. Dalton Wagner, working as the backup right tackle, generates real push of his own. The starting center controls his matchup with real authority. One rookie lineman even flashes encouraging pop on his rep. Then the tape cuts to JPJ's rep in that exact same sequence, same concept, same defender look, and there's just no push. None. I don't want to overstate one drill rep into a season-defining conclusion. That would be lazy analysis. But lined up back-to-back like that, the same drill run by 5 or 6 different bodies, the gap in effort and results becomes almost impossible to ignore. Stepping back, I don't believe this offensive line looks identical in week 1 compared to right now, and I think that's a good thing long term. You've got legitimate bodies competing for real spots up front. Burford, JPJ, Rogers, Zune, and it wouldn't shock me at all if we see multiple lineup shifts in the first few weeks of the regular season as this staff sorts out their actual best 5. Competition breeds improvement, even when it's uncomfortable to watch play out in public with a guy's job on the line. Speaking of Trey Zune, he's quietly putting together a fascinating camp of his own that isn't getting nearly enough attention. He's already logging center reps with the second-team unit and rotating in at right guard with the third-team group on top of that. That kind of versatility tells me this staff trusts his football IQ enough to move him around the interior, and it tells me he might climb past Jordan Meredith on this depth chart sooner than people expect. Versatility like that carries real value inside a system built around competition and rotation, rather than handing anyone a job on reputation alone. And I don't think it's a coincidence he's getting these varied looks this early. So here's where I land after everything I watched on day 3. This offense has real juice, genuinely dangerous juice. Brock Bowers is already a legitimate problem for opposing coordinators to solve, and I don't think that problem shrinks as the season goes on. I think it compounds. This receiver room is deeper and more talented than the outside perception gives it credit for. And this Ginty and Washington backfield rotation is shaping up to be one of the more fascinating storylines to track across the whole year, not just camp. But that offensive line, and specifically that unresolved battle at right guard, is the thing I'm watching more closely than anything else over these next several practices. Because once the pads finally go on, once this stops being about footwork and angles in a controlled environment and starts being about actual physical football, that's when we find out who on this line is genuinely ready to hold their ground and who still has serious work left before the games start counting for real. Based on what I watched today, I don't think that answer is anywhere near as settled as some people want to believe. That's everything I've got from today. Let me know what you think about this right guard battle and who you think ultimately walks away with that starting job once the real hitting begins.